very difficult to sit and watch a film about you and about your life and about your life.
They called me a homewrecker, a gold digger, the woman who destroyed Elvis Presley. When he died on August 16th, 1977, the world didn't just mourn him. They turned on me. Letters came pouring in, thousands of them, telling me it was my fault, that I killed him by leaving, that his broken heart was on my hands, that if I just stayed, if I just loved him enough, he'd still be alive. Death threats, actual death threats against me and my daughter. People saying I deserved to die for what I did to him. Fans screaming at me in public. Photographers chasing me down streets, shoving cameras in my face, demanding to know how it felt to be responsible for Elvis's death. And I couldn't say anything. I couldn't defend myself. Because how do you explain to a grieving world that leaving Elvis Presley wasn't cruelty, it was survival? How do you tell millions of people who loved an icon that the man they worshipped had become someone I couldn't live with anymore? Not because I stopped loving him, but because staying would have destroyed me too. I'm Priscilla Presley, and for 47 years I've carried the weight of being the woman who left Elvis, the villain in his story. The one who broke his heart and sent him spiraling into the drugs and the isolation and the despair that everyone believes killed him. But that's not what happened. That's not even close to what happened. And I've stayed quiet because I had a daughter to protect, because I had a legacy to preserve, because speaking the truth about Elvis meant destroying the myth the world needed him to be. So I smiled in interviews. I managed Graceland. I protected his image. I played the role of the devoted ex-wife who still loved him, still honored him, still kept his memory alive. And I did love him. God, I loved him. But love isn't always enough when you're living in a nightmare you can't wake up from. The guilt nearly killed me. For years, I second-guessed everything. Should I have stayed? Should I have fought harder? Should I have ignored the affairs and the pills and the rage and just endured it for his sake? Maybe if I'd been there that day, I could have saved him. Maybe if I hadn't left, he wouldn't have spiraled. Maybe. That guilt ate me alive. Every headline blaming me. Every interview where someone implied I abandoned him. Every time Lisa Marie asked about her father and I had to decide how much truth a little girl could handle. But here's what nobody knows. Here's what I've never said publicly until right now. The last time Elvis and I were truly alone together, really alone, without handlers or bodyguards or hangers-on listening at the door, he told me something that's haunted me ever since. This was months before he died. I'd come to Graceland to pick up Lisa Marie. We ended up talking in his office, just the two of us, and for a moment, it felt like old times. Like we were just two people who'd once loved each other deeply, trying to figure out how to coexist in this strange new reality. And he looked exhausted. Not just tired, exhausted, like something inside him had given up. His eyes were hollow, his voice was flat, and he said to me, "Scylla, I don't know who to trust anymore." I asked him what he meant, and he shook his head and said, "The people around me, the people I pay, the people who are supposed to protect me, I think some of them want me gone." Gone, not retired, not out of the spotlight, gone. I tried to laugh it off, told him he was just stressed, that he needed rest, that maybe he should take a real break from performing. But he grabbed my hand, squeezed it hard, and said, "I'm serious, Priscilla. If something happens to me, don't believe what they tell you. Don't believe it was an accident." My blood went cold. "Elvis, what are you talking about? Who would want to hurt you?" He wouldn't say, or maybe he couldn't say. But the look in his eyes wasn't paranoia, it wasn't drug-induced delusion, it was fear, real, genuine fear. He let go of my hand and said, "I'm making changes, big changes, to who works for me, who stays in my life, who gets what when I'm gone, and some people aren't going to like it." 3 months later, he was dead. And I've spent every day since then wondering if what he told me was real. If he actually knew something was coming. If someone really did have a reason to want Elvis Presley gone before he could make those changes he was planning. The official story says he died of a heart attack, drugs in his system, years of health problems catching up to him, and maybe that's true. Maybe I'm just a grieving ex-wife looking for meaning in a senseless tragedy. But then Vernon started saying things, asking questions, investigating, and then Vernon sealed documents for 50 years. And then Vernon died too, just 2 years after Elvis, with suspicions he never got to prove. And I realized something. The world blamed me for Elvis's death because it was easier than facing the possibility that someone close to him, someone he trusted, someone he paid, someone who smiled at his funeral, might have had a hand in it. So yes, I left Elvis, But I didn't kill him. I loved him until the day he died and every day after. And whatever happened in that bathroom at Graceland on August 16th, I wasn't there. But someone was, and that someone knows exactly what happened. The world saw Elvis Presley on stage. The jumpsuits, the charisma, the voice that could make 70,000 people fall silent with a single note. They saw the legend, the king, the icon who could sell out arenas and make women faint just by looking at them. But I saw what happened when the lights went down, when the audience went home, when the curtain closed and Elvis walked back into Graceland. And what I saw terrified me. By the mid-70s, Elvis wasn't living anymore. He was existing, trapped inside a mansion that had become his prison, surrounded by people who were supposed to protect him but were really just protecting their paychecks. Let me tell you what a typical day looked like for Elvis toward the end. He'd wake up, or more accurately, be woken up, at whatever time someone decided he needed to be conscious. Not when his body naturally woke, not when he felt rested, when someone else determined it was time. And that someone was usually whoever controlled his pill supply that day. Because that's what it came down to. Control. Elvis Presley, the most famous man in the world, was completely controlled by the people around him through one simple mechanism: access to medication. He was in pain, real, chronic, debilitating pain, back injuries from years of performing, glaucoma, high blood pressure, insomnia so severe he hadn't slept naturally in years, and instead of getting him real medical help, real treatment, real rehabilitation, the people around him just kept handing him pills, whatever he asked for, whatever kept him functional enough to perform, whatever kept him dependent. And here's the sickest part. They rationed those pills like prison guards rationing cigarettes. You want to sleep? You need to ask us. You want to perform tonight? You need to ask us. You want to function at all? You better stay in line, keep us employed, keep the money flowing, and maybe we'll give you what you need. I watched it happen. I watched Elvis become a prisoner in his own home, dependent on people who had every incentive to keep him sick, keep him needy, keep him under their control. And when I tried to say something, when I tried to tell him what I was seeing, they shut me out. After the divorce in '73, I lost whatever influence I'd had. The inner circle closed ranks. They made sure Elvis and I were never alone together for long. They monitored phone calls. They controlled who could visit and when and for how long. Because I was dangerous to them, I asked questions. I pushed back. I told Elvis the truth instead of whatever they needed him to believe to keep performing, keep earning, keep funding their entire lifestyle. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Elvis Presley supported dozens of people, paid their salaries, bought their houses, funded their families. Some of these people hadn't worked a real job in 20 years. Their entire existence depended on Elvis staying alive and staying productive. But here's the problem. Elvis was getting sicker, the tour were getting harder, the performances were becoming more erratic, and Elvis was starting to talk about changes, big changes. He told me about it that last conversation we had. He was planning to fire people, cut people off, people who'd been on his payroll for decades, people who thought they were set for life, people who'd built their entire world around access to Elvis's money and generosity. And some of those people were the same ones controlling his medication. Think about that for a second. Really think about it. If you're living off someone's generosity and that person is about to cut you off, and you're the one with access to their pills, their prescriptions, their bathroom cabinet, how far would you go to make sure those changes never happen? Elvis knew something was wrong. He told me he didn't know who to trust anymore. He was paranoid, yes, but maybe he had every reason to be. Maybe when you're surrounded by people who smile to your face while their entire livelihood depends on keeping you dependent and controlled, paranoia isn't mental illness. It's survival instinct. But he was trapped. Where could he go? How could he escape? Everyone he knew worked for him. Everyone in his life had a financial stake in keeping things exactly the way they were. And he was too sick, too dependent, too isolated to break free on his own. I tried to help. God knows I tried. I called. I visited when they'd let me. I begged him to see different doctors, to get away from Graceland, to take a real break somewhere the handlers couldn't follow. But they had him convinced he needed them, that he couldn't function without them, that if he fired them or left them or changed anything, everything would fall apart. They'd isolated him so completely that he genuinely believed he was incapable of existing without their management. And the doctors, don't even get me started on the doctors. Multiple physicians writing prescriptions for the same medications under different names. Thousands of pills flowing through Graceland every month, and nobody stopping it. Nobody saying this is insane. Nobody protecting Elvis from himself or from the people exploiting his pain and addiction. Because if they fixed him, really fixed him, they'd lose him. A healthy Elvis might actually make those changes he kept talking about, might actually fire the hangers-on and the enablers, might actually take control of his own life again. But a sick Elvis, a dependent Elvis, an Elvis who needed them to function, that Elvis was controllable, profitable, safe. I'll never forget the last thing he said to me in that conversation. After he told me about the changes he was planning, after he warned me not to believe it if something happened to him. He said, "I'm so tired, Scylla. I'm so damn tired of all of this." And I heard it in his voice, not just physical exhaustion, soul exhaustion, the weariness of a man who knew he was trapped and couldn't see a way out. 3 months later, he was dead in his bathroom, alone, surrounded by pills, and the people who controlled those pills were the same people who stood to lose everything if he'd lived long enough to make the changes he'd been planning. That's not conspiracy, that's just math. August 18th, 1977, 2 days after Elvis died, I walked through the gates of Graceland knowing that half the people there blamed me for the body lying in that copper casket. I could feel their eyes on me, the staff, the family members, the hangers-on who were suddenly grieving so publicly after years of enabling his destruction. Everyone looking at me like I was the reason we were all dressed in black, like I was the reason Elvis Presley was dead at 42 years old. And I had to hold my head up. I had to walk through that door with dignity, because my 9-year-old daughter was watching me. Lisa Marie, our baby, who just lost her father and now had to watch her mother get silently crucified by everyone in his world. The viewing was private, just family and close friends. But close friends at Graceland meant 50 people crammed into those rooms, and most of them weren't friends at all. They were employees, people whose paychecks had just stopped forever, people whose entire identity was wrapped up in being part of Elvis's world. And now that world was gone. I made myself walk up to the casket, made myself look at him, and I swear to God that wasn't Elvis lying there. I don't mean metaphorically, I mean that body in that casket looked wrong. The makeup was too heavy. The face was bloated beyond recognition. He was wearing a white suit and a blue shirt, and everything about it felt staged, performed, like someone had arranged a scene instead of preparing a body for burial. And something in my gut twisted. This isn't right. Something about this entire situation isn't right. But I couldn't say that. I couldn't voice those thoughts, because I was already the villain in this story. If I started asking questions, demanding answers, pushing back on the official narrative, they'd say I was attention-seeking, that I was trying to make his death about me, that I couldn't just let the man rest in peace. So I stood there, silent, staring at what used to be the man I loved, and trying to make sense of how we got here. The toxicology reports were already circulating. 14 different drugs in his system. Codeine, morphine, Quaaludes, Valium, Demerol. The list went on, and everyone was nodding along, saying, of course, we all knew he had a problem, we all knew this was coming. But here's what bothered me. Elvis had been on pills for years. He'd survived doses that should have killed him a dozen times over. His tolerance was enormous. And suddenly, on this particular day in his own bathroom with people all over Graceland who could have helped him, suddenly his body just gives out. The official story said he had a heart attack while sitting on the toilet, reading a book about the Shroud of Turin. Just a tragic, somewhat undignified end to a legendary life. Drugs and genetics and bad luck all catching up to him at once. But the timeline bothered me. Ginger found him in the afternoon. Where were the bodyguards? Where were the handlers who usually monitored his every move? Where were all these people who supposedly cared about him when he was dying alone in that bathroom? I wanted to ask these questions. The words were right there in my throat. But every time I started to speak, I'd look at Lisa Marie standing next to me, holding my hand, staring at her father's body with those wide, confused eyes. And I'd swallow the questions, swallow the suspicions, swallow everything except the grief I was allowed to show. The funeral itself was a circus. Thousands of people outside the gates, news helicopters overhead, reporters shouting questions, and inside everyone performing their sorrow for each other, dabbing at tears that may or may not have been real. I kept waiting for someone to acknowledge the truth, For someone to stand up and say this doesn't make sense, we need a real investigation, we need answers. But everyone just went along with the narrative. Heart attack. Drugs, tragic but predictable, case closed. And then, during the service, Lisa Marie leaned over and whispered something that made my blood stop cold. "Mommy, did someone hurt Daddy?" I looked down at her, this tiny 9-year-old child in a black dress asking the question that I'd been too afraid to voice out loud. And the way she asked it, it wasn't childish curiosity. It was genuine concern, like she'd sensed something the adults were all pretending not to notice. "What do you mean, baby?" She looked up at me with Elvis's eyes. Everyone's acting weird, like they're scared. Did someone hurt Daddy? Out of the mouths of children, innocence sees what denial blinds us to. I pulled her close and whispered back, "No, sweetheart, Daddy was sick, his body just couldn't keep going." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it, and I think she knew I didn't believe it. Because children can sense lies. They can feel when adults are hiding something. And Lisa Marie had spent enough time around Graceland to know that something about her father's death didn't add up. And that question, did someone hurt Daddy, became the question I couldn't stop asking myself. Late at night, in quiet moments, every time I thought about that last conversation Elvis and I had when he warned me not to believe it if something happened to him. But I couldn't investigate. I couldn't demand answers, because I had to protect Lisa Marie. She just lost her father. If I started publicly questioning his death, accusing people, making allegations I couldn't prove, what would that do to her? How would she grow up if her mother became known as the crazy ex-wife who couldn't accept that Elvis died of natural causes? So I stayed quiet. I buried my suspicions along with Elvis. I focused on being a mother, on preserving his legacy, on making sure Lisa Marie had some stability in her world that had just been shattered. But then Vernon started his investigation. Quietly, privately, asking questions, interrogating Ginger, sealing documents for 50 years. And I knew, Vernon suspected too. Vernon had the same gut feeling I did, that something about August 16th didn't add up. And then in June of '79, Vernon died too, just 23 months after Elvis. Heart failure, they said. Broken heart, people whispered. But I wonder, I've always wondered, did Vernon discover something? Did he get too close to the truth? Or did the weight of knowing but not being able to prove it, literally destroy him from the inside out? Whatever answers he found, he took them to his grave. For 47 years, I've lived with Elvis's ghost. Not literally. I don't mean I see him in hallways or hear his voice in empty rooms. I mean I've lived with the weight of him, the memory of him, the responsibility of protecting his image while carrying suspicions I could never voice. The impossible burden of being Priscilla Presley, forever defined by a man I divorced 5 years before he died. Every decision I've made since August 16th, 1977 has been filtered through one question: what's best for Lisa Marie? That's why I stayed quiet about my suspicions. That's why I never publicly questioned the official story. That's why I smiled in interviews and managed Graceland and played the role of the devoted ex-wife who kept the flame burning for the king of rock and roll. Because Lisa Marie needed stability. She needed to believe her father died of natural causes, tragic but comprehensible. She didn't need her mother on television accusing people of murder. She didn't need conspiracy theories and investigations and her family name dragged through endless speculation. So I protected her. I built a life around protecting her. And I carried the weight of what Elvis told me in that last conversation and what Vernon suspected and what I saw in those final years. I carried all of it silently, privately, for decades. But then January 12th, 2023 happened, and everything changed. Lisa Marie died, my daughter, my only child. The little girl I'd spent 45 years protecting, gone at 54 years old. Cardiac arrest, just like her father. And suddenly the reason I'd stayed silent all these years was gone too. I'm not going to lie to you. Losing Lisa Marie broke something fundamental inside me. She was my purpose, my anchor. The reason I got up every morning and kept managing the legacy and kept playing the role everyone expected me to play. And when she died, I realized something. I'm 79 years old. I don't have decades left, maybe not even years. And if I die without telling the truth, the real truth about what I witnessed, what Elvis told me, what I've suspected all along, then that truth dies with me. And I'm done protecting people who don't deserve protection. Because here's what's changed. The people Elvis was talking about when he said he didn't know who to trust anymore, the people he was planning to fire and cut off, the people Vernon suspected, most of them are dead now. Time did what the legal system never could. Those handlers and enablers and hangers-on who controlled Elvis's life in those final years, they faced their own mortality. They've answered to whatever judgment awaits us all when we die. Which means I can finally speak without putting anyone in danger. Without worrying about retaliation or threats or someone coming after my family, the way my mother-in-law warned Vernon's niece back in '79. If they can get to Elvis, they can get to anybody. But they're gone now, and so is Lisa Marie, and I'm still here. The last person standing who knew Elvis intimately, who saw what was happening, who heard his warning. So why now? Why am I finally telling this story after nearly 5 decades of silence? Because the narrative needs to change. I'm tired of being the woman who destroyed Elvis Presley. I'm tired of carrying blame for a death I had nothing to do with. I'm tired of watching people point fingers at me when the real questions, the dangerous questions, have never been properly asked. Did Elvis die of a heart attack complicated by drug use? Maybe. That's possible. His health was terrible. His drug dependence was real. And maybe that day in August was just the day his body finally gave out. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe Elvis was right to be afraid. Maybe Vernon was right to investigate. Maybe that 9-year-old child at the funeral was right to ask if someone hurt her daddy. And in 2 years, we might actually get answers. Those documents Vernon sealed in 1977, they open in 2027, 50 years after Elvis died. Whatever Vernon discovered during his private investigation, whatever evidence he collected, whatever names he wrote down, whatever suspicions he documented, it's all going to be available to the public. I don't know what's in those papers. Vernon never told me. He died before he could finish whatever he started. But I have to believe he left something behind, some record of what he found, some explanation for why he believed his son was murdered. And when those documents are released, maybe the world will finally understand why Vernon spent his last 2 years staring at Elvis's grave with rage and heartbreak in his eyes. Maybe they'll understand why he sealed those papers for half a century, instead of just letting the official story stand unchallenged. Or maybe we'll be disappointed. Maybe those documents contain nothing but financial records and family matters and medical information that has nothing to do with foul play. But I don't think so. I think Vernon knew something. I think he discovered something during his investigation that he couldn't prove in court but wanted preserved for history. And I think when 2027 comes, we're going to learn the truth about what really happened to Elvis Presley. Until then, I'm done being silent. I'm done protecting a narrative that was never true. I didn't kill Elvis. I didn't destroy him. I loved him and I tried to save him, and I watched helplessly as the people around him exploited his pain and his dependence and his isolation for their own gain. And when he warned me that if something happened to him, I shouldn't believe it was an accident. I should have listened. I should have pushed harder. I should have demanded answers instead of burying my suspicions to protect my daughter. But I can't change the past. All I can do is tell the truth now, while I still can, before I take these memories to my grave the way Vernon did. Elvis Presley deserves better than the story we've been told. He deserves a real investigation into what happened on August 16th. He deserves justice if justice is warranted. And I deserve to stop carrying the blame for his death. So here it is, my truth, my account, everything I witnessed and everything I've suspected for 47 years. Believe it or don't, but know this, I'm not lying. I have no reason to lie. I'm an old woman with nothing left to lose and no one left to protect. And the truth doesn't die just because we bury it. It just waits for the right moment to surface. If this changed how you see what really happened to Elvis, share your thoughts in the comments, but keep it respectful. And subscribe to this channel because when those 1977 documents unseal in 2027, we'll cover every single revelation together. The truth has been buried for 50 years, but not much longer. It's almost time.